The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Yesterday, I told you that Donald Trump pulled former CIA Director John Brennan's security clearance. And of course, it was a completely political move. Nothing Brennan did really indicates that he is erratic or untrustworthy with whatever information he could have access to. And of course, as someone who's not actually consulting for the president, as many former intelligence officials do, it's not even really clear that he regularly was accessing or receiving classified information. But that was yesterday. The more interesting new angle on this, and this is something I didn't think about yesterday, was the removal of the security clearance, not only from John Brennan, but the threat of removals from other people, whether it's DNI Clapper, former DNI Clapper, or other individuals, James Comey. Could it be a pretext or a precursor to removing Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller's security clearance, which, by the way, would make it very difficult for him to carry out the Trump-Russia investigation? Now, but before we get into the details and what Senator Mark Warner believes about this, remember that the reality is that it's Trump who's the existential risk when it comes to security clearances and classified information. While taking away other people's security clearances, Trump welcomed a Russian spy recruiter to the Oval Office and spilled classified information and secrets to him that came to us from an ally, Israel, at the real risk of ruining that relationship with an ally. So the real risk with security clearances and classified info is Trump, okay, not John Brennan. Senator Mark Warner, who's the top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, he put out the idea earlier this week that President Trump revoking John Brennan's security clearance may be setting up a pretext or precedent for doing the exact same thing to Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller. There's a certain evil genius to this. He is a former intelligence official. His role now is special prosecutor. It would be pretty tough for him to run the Trump-Russia investigation without a security clearance. And Warner said in a statement, about this, quote, "I worry whether this precedence will lead to the president trying to take away Mueller and his whole team's security clearance. This is clearly another effort to silence critics and not allow the Mueller investigation, and for that matter, our Senate Intelligence Community investigation to get to the bottom of this." I think that this is a very interesting angle because Trump has a long history of using varied methods to try to prevent that investigation from actually happening. He fired James Comey, at least in part, to interrupt and interfere with that investigation. He's angry that Jeff Sessions recused himself on everything related to Trump-Russia because had he not, Sessions could be running interference and trying to get that investigation to stop. He has been talking to Republicans in the House and Senate about, can't we get this thing wrapped up? His lawyers in their negotiations with Mueller about the, we still don't know if it'll happen, possible interview with President Trump, we know that the idea of he'd consider talking to Mueller if Mueller commits to ending the investigation at a particular time, something I hope Robert Mueller would never actually consider doing, but certainly something that Donald Trump's lawyers might want him to do. Look at how far we've come. There was a time when President Obama killed a fly during an interview, and it was major news. There was a time when President Obama wore a tan suit on a day where he was discussing something serious, and he was attacked for days by right-wing media. We've got a president now playing politics with security clearances, the security clearance of top intelligence officials like former CIA Director John Brennan, and his supporters like it. They see this as Trump fighting to defend himself. And of course, the best way to defend yourself, the best way to clear your name if you are indeed innocent, is let the investigation finish and clear you if that's what it's actually going to do. Now, I do have one hope. Pulling the security clearance for a special prosecutor, if Trump did it, that would be very clear obstruction of justice, wouldn't it? And I would imagine, I would hope that whoever replaces Robert Mueller, because the investigation doesn't just end if you pull the security clearance from Robert Mueller, I hope that in that case, Mueller's replacement would realize that the act of pulling the security clearance from Mueller is an act of obstruction of justice and maybe act on it. I don't know. I want to talk to the Republicans, though. Where are you on this? If the Republicans are the strongest supporters of not only the military, as they claim to be, but also the hardworking men and women of our intelligence community, why are they silent? Why are they allowing people like John Brennan and everybody else who clearly is at risk of having their security clearance pulled? Why aren't they rioting, hypothetically, or at least writing letters or showing up on media and saying, we can't allow this to happen. We can't allow them to be treated in this way. And the answer is they're complicit in all of it, and they're not going to do a damn thing. The people that right now are running the House and Senate, Republicans in the House and Republicans in the Senate, they are not going to hold anyone accountable when it comes to Trump Russia or Trump's inner circle. The only path forward is to win in November and to win 2 Novembers from that in 2020. Because this stuff, you and I might see it and say, wait, there's someone doing an investigation and it's into the president, and then the president pulls their security clearance and now they can't do that investigation anymore. That seems like a problem. That seems like it should be a crime. That seems like there should be repercussions. We get it. The Republicans who are in charge have made it abundantly clear that they won't do anything about it. And they've even gone further and made it very clear that even if Robert Mueller were to come back in 3 months or in 6 months or in 9 months and say, here's the list of stuff, these are criminal actions by the president, you can't indict a sitting president, so you, Republicans in the House and Senate, need to move to impeach, they're not going to do it. They are not going to do it. There is no indication that that's something they're going to do. And thus, we've got to vote in November, and we've got to vote in the following November as well. We have a fantastic bonus show for you today. On the bonus show today, we are going to go into identity politics. Is that true? Well, not really. We are going to talk about an issue of identity, and that is the issue of Donald Trump having no African-American senior White House staff. Now, some people in the audience will say, David, who cares? Why are you categorizing people on the basis of their race? That's racist. You are the racist for even noticing it. I don't think that's going to be too many people in the bonus show audience, but maybe people listening to this preview. We are also going to talk on the bonus show about back pain, which is something we've talked about on the show quite a bit in terms of its connection to sort of Western work culture as well as psychosomatic pain. And there are some interesting new data points about back pain and sitting and people working in offices. And then we also have some very interesting announcements to make about the next few weeks for the David Pakman Show. And if you are curious about what those announcements are, these are, I would call these pretty major announcements about the David Pakman Show. Earlier in the week, we announced that we hit 500,000 YouTube subscribers. This is a different type of announcement. So if any of that sounds interesting, or if it doesn't and you just want to support the show, please consider signing up for membership at www.joinpakman.com. You can save 40% using the coupon code VOTESOON18. And of course, Patreon is always available. You can also access the bonus show when you make a pledge of at least $5 a month at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. It is Friday. We will be taking your calls, answering your questions, and much, much more upcoming.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Sandy Carr. Sandy, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. Really appreciate your support. Also want to say thanks to a longtime member, David Becker. We don't just thank new members because the longtime members also are really, really important. David Becker has been with us since 2013, and I really appreciate his support as well as Sandy's. Let's see what's happening on the phone. 617-830-4750 is the number. Big news week, huge news week, and I'm curious to hear what people think. We'll start with our caller from the 905 area code. Caller from 905, what's on your mind?
Hi there. My name's Dean. Do you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Dean.
I'm actually calling from Canada.
That's okay.
So I have a pretty simple question, I think.
Yeah.
So in Canada, with the exception of like 10% of the population who want a Trump-like figure, I think, people tend to be a lot more progressive. So, as I'm sure you can imagine, Trump tends to affect us almost as much as he affects you. Like, not quite, but often the case. So do you think there's anything Canadians or others can do to support the progressive cause in the U.S. and maybe help to fight Trump?
You know, not really. And the reason why, Dean, is that the people who care about what Canadians think are already not voting for Trump, right? Like the people who we need to convince, if the goal is to convince people, are the people who, when we hear Canada is disgusted with what Trump is doing, France believes that what Trump is doing is an embarrassment, Japan can't understand how this man is president, they say, who cares what those other countries think? Like, by the very nature of their politics, they don't care what people in other countries think. So I think if there is one thing that Canadians can do, it's work on getting progressives to vote. You're not going to change the minds of the Trump voters, but voter turnout's really low in this country. So if you can get people who would not vote for Trump just to go vote for whoever it is that ultimately is the candidate, or in the midterms as well, I think that's the only thing I can think of. Unfortunately, I wish there was more you could do.
No, I understand. It's not always going to be the easiest thing. All right. Thank you, David.
Okay, Dean, appreciate the call. I love hearing from our neighbors to the north.
Yeah, you got to ask for permission there.
He sort of apologized that he was calling from Canada, but I said, no, don't apologize. That's a great thing. Let's go to our next caller from the 936 area code. Caller from 936. What's going on?
Hello, David. This is Jason from Houston, Texas. I used to be a hardcore conservative, but now I'm a huge fan of your show.
Okay. The two aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. You could be a hardcore conservative and a fan of the show, too.
Well, actually, I changed from watching your show, and I'm very proud of that because
now we're talking.
I don't know, my parents are, they used to be thinking that the U.S. was going to reinvade Texas and a number of other things because they're huge Alex Jones fans.
Okay.
And now I feel like since social media has taken such a root in our culture that it's really polarized people. And my parents used to be very peaceful, people who had subtle views that were conservative, but now they're really against the wall on certain issues, I guess. And my question is, with Trump as the president now and acting as a catalyst for all these people to come out of the woodworks and spread this type of agendas, do you think that the world stage is actually going to just wait this presidency out, or is this now the view of Americans from the world stage, I guess?
Well, there's two things going on simultaneously, and you're thinking about it the right way. One is that countries would be understandably skeptical about getting into deals with Trump because, as we saw, he just backed out of the Iran deal, even though Iran didn't violate that deal. He says one thing, and then Jim Mattis or John Kelly or whoever say, no, we don't know anything about that. We're doing this other thing. So, like, from a pragmatic standpoint, why would anyone do business with this guy? That's number one. Number two, I do believe that there are countries that are simply going to circumvent the United States for the duration that Trump is president, like on climate issues. Trump says he's pulling out of the Paris climate deal. He said that climate change is a hoax from the Chinese in order to stimulate their manufacturing industry. So other countries just won't deal with the U.S. They'll kind of move full speed ahead. The downside to that is that the U.S. is one of the big polluters, so you kind of want the U.S.'s involvement. So I think it's going to be a little bit of both. But if I can, I want to go back to something you said, Jason. So if I understand correctly, you used to be a conservative, but the David Pakman Show deprogrammed you, and now you're a progressive. Your parents used to be moderate conservatives, and they, after watching Alex Jones, have become extreme. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Man, that's not good. I mean, is that difficult for you in your relationship with your parents?
There's a definite schism in our family after that, and we really haven't spoken in pretty much a year now. I mean, when we do, it's kind of it becomes a heated debate every time, and it seems like they don't want to. I tried to show them some of your videos because they're very enlightening on some subjects.
Thank you.
And it doesn't seem to get through. I don't know.
Like what do your Alex Jones fan parents say when you show them a David Pakman Show video?
Well, they tell me they look at it and that they don't have the time to do research anymore. Yet when I go on their social media, they're still posting memes and stuff of really talked about issues that have been explained. Wow. Like the memes that people pass around telling each other that that Christians are a minority in America are being harassed and Sharia law going around in our country. It's not happening, and I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Jason, that's horrible. I'm really sorry to hear that. And if I played any role in this schism that has developed, my sincere apologies. That's horrible, and to think that I may have had a role in that, I feel really bad.
Definitely not. Thank you for your influence and help. I've been able to actually help other people come to better ways to find logic and reasoning. Your videos on that has really helped that go a lot more smoothly and less. I don't know how you're able to do that, but when you disagree with people, you seem to do it in a very non-aggressive manner. I don't know how to do that myself.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. Jason, a pleasure hearing from you, and best of luck with what's going on with the family. Appreciate the call.
Thank you for taking the time with me, David. You have a good day.
All right. Thank you. Wow.
Yeah. Kind of mixed feelings about that one, because on the one hand, we helped him see the light and come around to the right positions. On the other hand, it sounds like we're causing family separations, families to break up, and we don't want that.
I mean, let's move on. 617-830-4750. Next caller is from the 787 area code. What's going on?
Hi, David. My name is Brian, and I'm calling from Puerto Rico.
Hey, what's going on? I heard you guys just got full power back for the first time since the hurricanes. Is that accurately reported?
Yeah, in the last couple of weeks, we've had 100% restoration of power. There's
Excellent.
still some local areas that don't, but it's slowly getting there.
Cool. What's on your mind today?
My question involves the midterms, and if Democrats fail to materialize and win the House, do you think that Nancy Pelosi has the responsibility to step down as minority leader?
No, I don't think so. No, I mean, listen, whatever your opinion of her as leader, that she doesn't automatically have to step down if Democrats don't retake the House. I mean, sure, you can attribute some responsibility to her. I think there's lots of other reasons why Democrats could argue she's not the best person to be leading. But I don't think that just a failure to retake the House would mean she has to step down. I mean, why would you suggest it? In other words, what would be an argument for her stepping down if Democrats don't retake the House?
Well, I think that, when you consider, the establishment candidates that have been sort of prevailing in the primary elections, and if they don't win enough seats, and I think that it will directly respond to Nancy Pelosi for keeping on the establishment candidates instead of promoting more progressive agenda and more progressive candidates.
I don't know, Brian. It's a bit of a stretch. I've got huge problems with Nancy Pelosi, but a lot of these, especially House congressional races, they're not really about Nancy Pelosi in any way, and the dynamics are more local. So I just don't know. I think it's a great. Let's talk about Nancy Pelosi not being the minority leader. Great topic. I'm totally up for that. I just don't know that Democrats failing to retake the House means Pelosi's got to be out.
Okay. Well,
all right.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Appreciate the call, and glad to hear power's back on in Puerto Rico. That's a story we've been covering for a very long time, and that's good news. Let's go to our next caller from the 845 area code. Caller from 845. Who's this? Go ahead.
Hey, this is James from Florida. 845 is a New York area code, but I moved down here.
All right. Well, with peace and love, all area codes are welcome.
My question is about the midterms in 2018. People say that there's a big blue wave coming. I'm a little skeptical because I know Democrats have a million ways to mess things up. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
But my question is particularly about Maryland. I was looking at the governor's race down there, and I found that the Republican incumbent has like a 15-point lead in the polls over the Democrat.
Yep.
And Maryland is a traditionally blue state. And I'm wondering what you think about that.
I haven't been following that super closely. Is that where Ben Jealous is running against? Ben Jealous is the Democrat?
Yeah, Ben Jealous and the Republican Larry Hogan.
Yeah. It's not good, if that's accurate. I haven't seen polling recently, but assuming that you're right, that would be a very different, those would be numbers that paint a very different story than the overwhelming blue wave story. Here's the thing. I don't know enough about that particular race to say too much of value about it. Every single election needs to be thought of as winnable, but an uphill battle, right? So that there's no excuse to stay home because you think it's an easy Republican win, and there's no excuse to stay home because you think it's an easy Democratic win. Just period. If there's an opportunity to vote, no matter what you think the results might be, pretend that your vote could make a difference, because it could, and go out and vote, right? Period. I think that that's the approach. And I also have some fear of the blue wave talking points that it sounds like you're skeptical about it. I also am. And that's why what I'm saying is I don't care where you're voting. Think of every race as a toss-up.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I see these polls everywhere. Like, I see even Massachusetts, Charlie Baker has, like, the last poll was a couple months ago, but he had like a 30-point lead in the polls.
Yeah, that's not surprising. Like, that I don't even consider that's not going to be a factor in the. I mean, in Massachusetts, we get these kind of like decaf Republicans as governors often. It's happened with Bill Weld and Mitt Romney, and there have been others.
Mitt Romney, yeah.
Yeah, and they often kind of go under the radar because they're not ideologically bonkers Republicans as a general thing, and they end up getting reelected on the basis of their sort of like the job they're doing administratively. So I wouldn't read too much into that.
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, I do kind of think there's a blue wave happening because I do think there's a lot of energy on the Democratic side. Like you see last night in Vermont, there was a transgender got put on the ballot.
Yep.
And like, I mean, I'm skeptical about it. I just know Democrats know how to screw things up. Everyone said Hillary, oh, she's a shoo-in.
Yeah.
No.
Listen, cautious optimism. Cautious optimism is the word. I appreciate the call. Everybody vote in every single election. 617-830-4750. Let's see who else is on the phones today. Let's go to the 267 area code. Caller from 267, go ahead.
Hello?
That's you.
Hi, David. How you doing?
Good.
My name's Aaron from Philadelphia, and my question to you is, what do you think is the biggest, well, let's assume that Bernie does run. What do you think is the biggest, disadvantage, at least? I've been doing my own kind of polling around my friends and family, and I found that age seems to be the biggest factor that people don't want to vote for him for. And I always personally thought that if he got past the primary, it would kind of be a layup for him, and he got past Joe Biden and all those folks and his GMC, then it'd be great, to probably win. But I'm getting a lot of young folks and a lot of older people saying that age is the biggest factor of why they wouldn't vote for him. Now,
young and old people say Bernie's age is why he would. But middle, like people in the middle, they're okay with.
Yeah, middle age, like boomers for the most part. Yeah.
Hey, out of curiosity, where are you calling from?
I am from right outside my job at the Leaden Terminal Market. Leaden Terminal Market, a little windy out.
It's a wind. Okay, wind is what's got you. I wanted to figure out. I didn't know if you were like a nuclear sub technician and you were calling from like a Faraday cage or something. Listen, I don't. The Bernie age thing. Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I don't know that a guy who isn't going to be 80 years old in 2020. Like, he's not?
I think 79.
79, yeah. Or he'd be 79 when he would be inaugurated. I just don't know. I'm not ageist in any way. I just don't know if what Democrats need to do. Like, I'm not talking about identity politics. It's not that Bernie is a good or bad candidate because he's a white guy. I'm just saying I don't know if from a practical perspective it makes sense to run a 79-year-old white guy against what will be a 74, 75-year-old white guy. I don't know. Like I like Joe Biden as well, but he's going to be close to 80. I'm not sure.
Now, do you agree that age is his biggest takeaway factor? Is that his biggest pet peeve?
In a way I do, because I just don't see other things about him that I see as big deficits. So in a sense, it's kind of like the only thing that's left.
I always thought it was going to be maybe him just getting past primary factor. So maybe the DNC is going to screw him out of it again.
The DNC.
Something of that factor, but...
Yeah. Listen, I'm having the hardest time hearing you. It sounds really windy there, and now it seems like a band has started up. I'm going to let you go, but it's a very important issue, and I'm going to talk to it. Yeah, I'm going to talk about it in the future.
Yeah, Bernie Sanders is 76 now. Joe Biden 75.
Yep.
So if you're going to discount Bernie Sanders for his age, I think it stands to reason you'd have to discount Joe Biden too.
Agree.
It's only a 1 year difference.
I agree, and I think with both of them, I would just say are nearly 80-year-old people the ones that we're going for, and it's not. I have no problem with older people. It's just, is that what we need at this time, or do we need energy? I don't know. Okay, let's go to our caller from. Not that they don't have energy. I've seen Bernie's jump shot, by the way, and it's excellent. Let's go to our next caller from the 904 area code. Who's this?
Hi, David. This is Chris from Florida. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. So this is going to be this might be kind of a downer question, but I haven't really seen it thrown out there. Maybe it has been and I'm not looking. So I'm just going to get to it. Do you think we kind of need to have like another economic recession or depression? Like, I mean, it looks like we're already going that route, but even if we weren't, just with how everything is now in this political landsphere, I almost think we kind of need one. And maybe that's like really cynical of me, but what's your take on that?
What would be the point of needing it? Like, why would we need an economic downturn or recession?
Well, because I don't think a lot of American people don't understand how bad it is yet.
But if it's not bad yet, hold on a second. Chris, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not bad yet, then what do you mean people don't understand how bad it is yet? Are you saying that things are worse than people realize, so you think maybe it would be good for them to get even worse so people get it? Or I'm confused.
Yeah, I guess sort of that. Because, you could throw numbers. Sure, go ahead.
No, I'm not sure that makes sense, right? Because we want people to have an accurate understanding of what's going on. Ideally, we would say, this is what's going on in the economy. And there are some indicators that don't bode super well. Like, one is, usually there's always a recession coming, like at some point. And now it's been a while without one. So like that would be one piece of evidence that one is coming. I don't know exactly when, but at some point we're going to have one. Number two, there are lots of people, including people like roughly my age, people who graduated college sometime between 06 and 2010, who basically have been in the workforce during a good economy, right? You can say, well, it was a little better here, a little worse there. It's gone up, down under Trump, Obama. But these have been pretty good economies with pretty good unemployment rates and so on and so forth, other than the wage issue, which of course is one. They are completely unprepared for what it's like when the stock market is down 40% and you have rising unemployment. Like, there's a whole almost like half a generation that doesn't know what that's like. So would there be useful lessons in them living through something like that? Probably, but I don't think that we should be trying to convince people things are worse than they actually are. I don't see the benefit of that.
Well, and again, just for perspective, living in North Florida, like I only just graduated high school maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I was in college for a little bit, but now I'm working and I've taken some time off.
Okay.
But just in the last couple of years, and I don't know if it's just my area, if it's just like the Bible Belt of the U.S. or how it is.
Okay.
I don't think I've seen more homeless people like in my life than I have just in like the last
20
2
minutes.
to 3 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And like, I don't think I've seen it to where all of the jobs are now lower paying jobs. And again, that's something you can throw out there. Like
which you're
Fox
doing,
News will throw a BS.
Yeah, Chris, I'm not exactly sure where we're going.
Oh.
I think I get the point, which is that sometimes the economy isn't so good, and when that's the case, people should know about it. But as far as, homelessness and wages and low, medium, and high quality jobs, those are sort of other issues. But I do appreciate the call, and I do wish you the best in North Florida. And it's all, a lot is going on there, very, very clearly, a lot going on in North Florida and with Chris and during that phone call. Okay, thanks to everybody who called in today. If you're still holding, I apologize that I didn't get to you. We can't always get to everyone, but we will take calls again.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
For today's classic interview, we're going to go back to when I spoke to Nell Bernstein back in June of 2014, and we spoke specifically about child incarceration. This has been shoved back into the forefront because of the Trump family separations and child internments. And Nell spoke generally about child incarceration outside of the specific families at the border paradigm. And I think that's the sort of context that I'm thinking of reviewing the interview within. Let's go back to my interview, Nell Bernstein, on child incarceration from June of 2014, and just apply what she said in this interview to what we see going on right now every single day at the U.S.-Mexico border. I'm joined today by Nell Bernstein, who's the author of Burning Down the House, as well as All Alone in the World, and a winner of the White House Champion of Change Award. Today, we're going to talk about childhood incarceration in the United States. And Nell, I think a good place to start would be, we've talked about adult incarceration rates in the U.S., and how the U.S. is up there with North Korea at the top 2 in terms of incarceration rates for adults. If we look at child incarceration rates, where does the U.S. rank?
Well, we're at an interesting juncture right now, because on the one hand, juvenile incarceration rates are falling significantly. They've dropped by 40% over the past 10 years. At the same time, we are still the #1 in the U.S., in the world, for locking up our kids by a factor of about 7, I think.
And what types of crimes are getting juveniles in juvenile incarceration facilities?
Well, because juvenile incarceration so often leads to adult incarceration, the important question for me is what type of crimes lead to that first incarceration?
Right.
And there, it's almost always a low-level, non-dangerous offense. Sometimes, graffiti, loitering, public drunkenness, a marijuana charge, and then once you're in the system, endless probation violations. So not the super predator that we were led to believe.
And are there some, I don't know if crimes is the right word, or as you talk about them, status violations that only apply to juveniles, whereas for adults, those actions wouldn't necessarily put them into prison or jail?
That's tricky also, because there were some legal changes meant to eradicate locking kids up for status offenses, particularly running away. But a lot of kids I've met are locked up for something that happened along with a status offense. So you run away and you sleep on the street, and that's a crime. So I think minor offenses, some of which are status offenses, would be the most accurate.
And for people who don't know, can you explain what a status offense is and maybe give us some other examples beyond running away?
Sure. A status offense refers to your status as a juvenile. So it's something that would not be illegal if you were an adult. It's only illegal because you're a kid. So running away, underage drinking, truancy, that's a big one. If I don't go to work, it doesn't go well for me, but I don't go to jail. If my kids make the same choice, they're at risk of a truancy charge, that sort of thing.
And you talked just very briefly there about how the initial juvenile incarceration often leads to incarceration as an adult. So I want to take that in a couple of pieces, because I think there may be a couple of angles to that. First, let's talk about the sentences. How can a juvenile incarceration sentence turn into an adult incarceration sentence?
Well, here's what happens. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background, because this is a figure that really shocked me. 80 to 90% of all American teenagers in confidential interviews will tell you that they've committed an offense serious enough under the law to get them locked up. But most of them are not locked up, right? Nobody notices, they get a pass, or maybe they get some kind of community alternative. And those kids grow up and grow out of the impulsivity that led to that original offense. The portion of the 80 to 90% of Americans who are delinquent, apparently, who get incarcerated, they don't stay straight through to adulthood, but it's a very traumatic experience. Many experience abuse, physical abuse. 1 in 10 are raped by guards. And even without that, it's an environment in which sort of fulfilling all the developmental tasks of adolescence are pretty much impossible. And of course, you develop a criminal identity. So that's why it so often spirals into adult incarceration, along with the stigma and label of being a delinquent.
So let's talk a little bit about that. 80 to 90% of American teenagers admit to some activity that could be classified as a crime, but most will never actually spend any time incarcerated. With adult incarceration, we see the disproportionate application of sentences to those who are poor and to minorities. Do we see those same factors playing a role in what percentage or which ones of those American teenagers end up spending time in prison?
You've asked exactly the right question. And that's why I use that number pretty frequently. I think that some of us are more familiar with statistics like a Black youth is 5 times more likely to be locked up for the same charge and with the same background as a white youth. So there are disproportionalities at every step of the system: arrest, detention, disposition or sentencing, parole, probation. At every juncture, researchers have found not just disparate rates, but differential treatment based on your race and to a lesser degree class. So I think the reason it's so important for me to share that the great majority of teenagers get involved in delinquency is that it really busts the myth that one race is more criminal than another. It turns out as adolescents, we're all delinquents. We have poor judgment, our brains aren't fully developed, and we just need support to get through it.
And let's explore that concept a little bit. So if we look at the cost, and we've explored with adults that very often when it comes to, for example, homelessness, it's actually cheaper to provide housing and basic health care to someone who's homeless than the social costs over the course of a year from that person being homeless. We've talked about adult education. College education is often less expensive than the cost of incarceration. I'm guessing, and I open it up to you to tell me whether I'm right or wrong, that this is it's at least equally pronounced when it comes to juveniles in terms of education versus juvenile detention.
I think it's much more pronounced, especially if you consider the opportunity cost of a lost life. We spend $88,000 on average to incarcerate a kid and $10,000 on average to educate a single youth. And the kids know this. The message they get from that is, we'll spend anything to contain you, but nothing to cultivate you. And that's a very destructive message.
When the juvenile detention centers are, well, I'll phrase it a different way. How prevalent is solitary confinement in juvenile detention centers? Because that's something that, again, on the adult side, we've talked about the destructive effects long-term of solitary confinement. And again, from an outsider's point of view, I would imagine that destructive effect would be even more significant to a juvenile.
You're right. I mean, the United Nations calls 15 hours or more torture for adults and has any amount of time in solitary is considered torture for children and teenagers. Officially, about a third of juvenile detainees end up in some form of solitary confinement. It's hard to measure because we don't like to use that word. We call it ad-seg, or my favorite, the reflection cottage. Among the kids I met, and I talked to a lot of kids, I think I met maybe 1 or 2 who hadn't experienced some form of solitary confinement or room isolation.
1 or 2 who had not experienced that, you're saying?
That's not empirical. But, you know, if you include things like locking down a whole unit because there's a shortage of teachers, so you're in your cell all day, they had all experienced that kind of intense isolation. And at least a third had experienced formal solitary confinement. So a barren cell with maybe just a blanket.
And Nell, officially on the record, what are the reasons stated in some or many of these cases? How can we characterize the official explanations for why this solitary confinement is being assigned?
Well, it's interesting. Senator Durbin has held a couple hearings on this, and the official explanation given, I think, by the head of the Federal Bureau of Prisons and given by everyone under the sun was safety and security. Don't take this away from us. It's a tool that we need. But the kids who actually end up in solitary, for example, and I heard this over and over, if you threaten suicide or act suicidal, you'll likely end up stripped naked and tossed into a solitary cell, where a disproportionate number of suicides, unsurprisingly, then occur.
Sure.
If you're the aggressor in a fight, you could end up in solitary. If you're the victim of a fight, you could end up in solitary. If they're processing your papers, you could end up in solitary. The number of reasons is almost beyond reason, really.
Incredible. I want to remind everybody that the books are Burning Down the House as well as All Alone in the World. We've been speaking with Nell Bernstein. I recommend both books. Nell, thank you so much for being with us and really shedding light onto something that many people may not even be aware is going on.
Well, thank you. It was my pleasure.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let's get to audience questions for the week. One viewer writing in, "Hey David, given everything that's going on between Ben Shapiro and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Candace Owens and people debating and the entire Twitter thing, would you debate Ben Shapiro or Candace Owens?" Yeah, I would. I mean, I said I was involved in this entire Twitter fiasco over the weekend, connected to Ben Shapiro and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens. And I said, I'll debate any of you. Nobody has to pay anybody, and we'll do it. But the thing about debating is the following. Number one, I don't know that they want to debate me, right? I mean, at this point, I think Ben Shapiro probably would not see it as a good use of his time to come on the show and debate something, number one. I just don't think Candace Owens will do it. I don't know about, use of her time. I don't know what her platform is. Like, she has a YouTube channel, right? Or I don't even know where she puts out her content.
But she's also like a Fox News contributor and does that sort of thing too.
I mean, she's also busy. I just don't think that she would want to do it. But the thing about debates is, debate them about what, right? Like, the idea, I'm not just going to show up and debate anyone on any topic. So, like, affirmative action is one that I think Ben Shapiro is very much against, and he talks about why he's against affirmative action when he does these college speaking things. That's not one of my main issues. So I wouldn't really be the right person to debate Ben Shapiro about that. I would be glad to debate, I think Candace Owens challenged someone. I think maybe she challenged Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to a socialism versus capitalism debate. That would be interesting. I'm not a socialist, right? I am a social democrat, and I believe that most things exist in shades of gray. And I think that highly regulated capitalism to foment social good, blah, 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 blah. But I would still be up for pushing back against Candace Owens' misstatements about both capitalism and socialism.
Yeah, and also Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is not a socialist in her own right, too.
Oh, I thought she was.
Well, I mean, she may identify as a democratic socialist, but she seems to be more of a social democrat, right?
Oh, see, I thought that's what I thought at first, but then more recently it seemed people were saying, no, she really is a democratic socialist.
Okay.
I guess I'm confused. I guess I don't know the answer to that, but I'd love to find out more. It seems every time I read another article, it goes back and forth between saying she says she's a democratic socialist, but really she's a social democrat, to, oh, no, she's really a democratic socialist. She does want a takeover of the means of production by by society, so to speak. Listen, not the question here, but something I am interested in. So yeah, listen, I would debate Ben Shapiro, Candace Owens. I mean, I would really debate anyone if they want to debate an issue in good faith, assuming that they are relatively prominent, right? Like, every day I get 10 debate invitations from YouTube channels with 100 to 1,000 subscribers. Some people, when I say this, get mad. When I say there's limited time in the day, I have a show to produce, which is a full-time job. I also am running the business of the David Pakman Show, which is a significant undertaking in and of itself. I can't just accept every debate with some random YouTuber and people get mad at me, but it's just, there's only 24 hours in the day, and some of those hours I've got to be sleeping. But I'm willing to debate people who have followings if it's the right issue. And there's a lot of right issues. It's just if you want, like once I was invited to debate Brexit with Sargon of Akkad. Brexit's not my issue. Unlike he has taken a great interest in American politics, I have an interest in UK politics in the context of geopolitics and how it affects the United States, but I'm not like a UK politics expert. So I just wouldn't be the right person to debate Brexit with Sargon.
Yeah, it's got to be the right topic, and it has to move the needle, too. I mean, I think, you debating Ben Shapiro or you debating Candace Owens, that would actually make sense because you're all new media figures.
Oh, fair.
One of those people debating Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez doesn't make any sense because it's a new media figure up against a congressional candidate.
And I would love it. I would love it if she did it. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. But, to get back to the kerfuffle earlier in the week where the idea, it's crazy she didn't even respond. It's like, well, she's running for the House of Representatives. Is going to L.A. to debate Ben Shapiro really the thing that at this point she needs to be doing? Anyway, yes, I will debate. Next question. Hey, David, you've done a lot of critiques of the intellectual dark web, and you very often mention Sam Harris when you're talking about anti-intellectualism. Are you calling Sam Harris an anti-intellectual? Because I don't think he is one. I'm glad to have this opportunity to clarify this. Sam Harris is included, as far as I know, in the intellectual dark web, which consists of, I'm going off the top of my head here, and Pat, you'll fact check me. Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, Dave Rubin, the Weinstein brothers,
Joe
Rogan, Sam Harris, Steven Pinker, Michael Shermer. Yeah, okay. So they're intellectual dark web, whatever. I don't consider Sam Harris to be a pseudo-intellectual. I believe that Sam Harris does meet the definition of a public intellectual. That doesn't mean I have to agree with him on everything. So, for example, on race and IQ, I continue to be of the mindset that the differences that we see among racial groups, to the extent that we've defined them the way we do right now for this analysis, are not a result inherently of being a member of that racial group. In other words, Ashkenazi Jews had long periods of time where they weren't allowed to do anything other than basically read stuff and debate it. On the other hand, you had a long period of time where American blacks were not allowed to learn to read. Why would it be that surprising if on an IQ test meant to measure a very particular type of understanding or intelligence, you can call it, or whatever, you would have Ashkenazi Jews scoring better than African Americans? That doesn't mean that the Ashkenazi Jews score better because they're Ashkenazi Jews. Imagine if for that same period of time, Jews were not allowed to read, and it was blacks who were hanging around discussing the Talmud and debating law and ethics. Do you still think that you would see the same IQ test results? So I think on that, I kind of disagree with Sam Harris, but I do believe that he is not one of the pseudo-intellectuals we've identified in the intellectual dark web.
Well, it just sounds to me like the intellectual dark web is a very diverse group of people. You have everyone from Sam Harris on the left to Ben Shapiro on the right, and Dave Rubin in the middle as a classical liberal.
Yes, they are exactly in the middle with no political biases whatsoever. They just evaluate every idea on its merits, and engage in the battle of ideas. No, listen, so yeah, I don't, if I've misspoken, or not misspoken, if I've been ambiguous in the past, Sam Harris, I don't consider to be a pseudo-intellectual, and my mentions of him in stories about the intellectual dark web are only in explaining to the audience who are the supposed members of the IDW, but I do not think Sam Harris is a pseudo-intellectual. That doesn't mean I agree with him on everything. Last question today. Hey, David, why are Americans more religious than Europeans? Two main pillars of reasoning that I believe explain why Americans today are more religious than Europeans. First of all, some of the early settlers of the United States of America came to the United States of America and left the countries of their origin, in many cases in the UK, but also people from the Netherlands, Germans, and others. They came here because they wanted the freedom to practice their religion unfettered by the religious de facto status quos of their countries in Europe. So by definition, when you have a country that starts with the idea of being able to practice religion unfettered, that may lead to a more religious population. Now, of course, it's been many hundreds of years. So then the sort of secondary question would be, why has the United States not become less religious at the same speed that Europe has? Well, I would argue that Europe has become less religious in some places, but not in others. There are still parts of Europe and communities in Europe that are still quite religious. The difference is that Europe has drawn a much harder line when it comes to separation of church and state. Secularism, the idea that religion simply has no place in the sort of government and public sphere. In the United States, you have even today a significant portion of Republicans in the House and Senate who are, quote, Christians. Some of them are Catholics, some of them are evangelicals, Baptists, all sorts of different sects, who kind of believe in separation of church and state, but they still talk about the morality they get from the Bible in terms of their opposition to abortion or their opposition to LGBT rights or whatever the case may be. So the lack of a firewall between church and state in the United States has fostered the country remaining more religious than lots of countries in Europe have.
You talked about some of the historical reasoning.
Yeah.
I think it also has to do with the new frontier, you know, that America has experienced over the past 200 years or so. Like, there were even people who would leave Massachusetts and, like, the Pilgrim Colony because they wanted to start religious movements of their own, like Roger Williams in Rhode Island, or even more recently, Mormons in Utah. And so just, like, having that space to venture out and start your own thing, I think that helps, like, at a grassroots level, develop your own religion.
I think you're right. And in the background, we can't ignore that scientific and mathematical proficiency is inversely correlated with religiosity, okay? And if you've been following the education crisis that the United States is facing, you would know that we are being rapidly overtaken by many other countries in math and science. I believe it would be borne out, and of course, this is the country we have, so there's no way to really A/B test it. We can compare to other countries, but every country is different. If the United States was doing better in math and science, and everybody had a more thorough understanding of not only math and science, but critical thinking and philosophy from an early age, you would probably see religious belief decay more quickly than we're seeing it decay.
Well, that's because all those professors are indoctrinating the children with their atheist garbage.
No doubt about it. Of course, yeah, it's a complete conspiracy, but it would work. And last thing, the United States is becoming less and less religious over time. Let's not forget that. It's just not becoming less and less religious as quickly as other countries, particularly countries in Europe, are, but the U.S. is becoming less religious, and I see nothing at this point that's going to reverse that trend. Thank you for your questions. We have a great bonus show planned for you today. Access the bonus show. Two options. Number one, become a member at www.joinpacman.com. Option number two, become a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Both give you instant access to the world-famous bonus show, which is coming up right after the show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.